Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at MSI's classic board, the B450 Tomahawk Max version 2. Is it worth it? Keep watching to find out. Okay, so let's start off the video and get straight into the meat and potatoes of why this is the version 2 of the Tomahawk Max rather than the original Tomahawk Max. So there's four main changes which have been kind of modified in order to bring this slightly up to a more modern level, and those are essentially not very dramatic changes, to be completely honest with you. So realistically, if you're looking at buying one of these boards and you're offered the Max or the Max 2 at similar prices, or even if the Max is considerably cheaper, definitely go for the Max. The Max 2 really isn't worth any extra for an upgrade. So the first thing we've got difference on this is the HDMI output. So if you're using an APU, then you are going to see some moderate benefits. We now support HDMI 2.1A, whereas previously we were limited to HDMI 1.4. Again, not a huge difference, but to some people it may be quite important. Realistically, you're going to get now 4K 60 FPS or 60 Hz on the majority of screens. The next part of it is audio related. So previously the Tomahawk and the Tomahawk Max used the ALC 892 audio chipset, whereas now this uses the 897. Realistically, there's very little between the two codecs, and quite often the driver packages will actually group those two chipsets together anyway. Realistically, you're probably not going to notice any difference whatsoever. Next up is going to be memory support. So the original Tomahawk and Tomahawk Max all supported up to 4133 MHz on RAM. What they've actually added now is a few extra XMP settings for some slightly obscure RAM speeds. So 3866, which I actually have never seen before, is now supported straight out of the box, should you need it. One of the main features, or one of the best upgrades of this, is actually BIOS compatibility. Now this board, the Max 2, actually supports Zen 2 processors or Ryzen 3000 series processors straight out of the box without any need to do a BIOS update. For some people that may be very beneficial if you're slightly hesitant about doing a BIOS upgrade yourself and you want to use a Ryzen 3000 series chip such as the 3600. This has got the BIOS ready straight out of the box with version H0, which is compatible with those processors. Sadly though, for those of you who are looking to use a 5000 series processor, you are going to need to upgrade it to BIOS version H4 or higher. So there we go, there are the four key upgrades or differences between the Tomahawk B450 Max and the Max 2. Yeah, not a great deal to get excited by. The reason why I actually bought this board is because this is available from CCL here in the United Kingdom, and I picked it up for an absolutely spectacular price of around about £35 as being a manufacturer refurbished model. Now there were some things missing, such as the backplate, the plastic lugs which go on here were missing. Obviously if you're buying this as a new product for somewhere in the region of about £60 here in the UK, you will obviously get that fully assembled straight out of the box. Also, you're going to get things like your user manual, which I did get included also, and also obviously a backplate. This being a slightly older board and a B450 doesn't have an integrated I/O shield on the back, but certainly it is included in the box if you want to use one. So that's the key differences out of the way, and the reason why I bought it, A, because it was considerably cheap. I am actually planning to use this with a 4300 GE processor, which is an OEM type processor. Again, also I picked this up cheaply from CCL here in the UK for somewhere in the region of about £90. So actually motherboard and processor combo for somewhere in the region of about £120 I think is a fantastic value for money, and obviously the Tomahawk boards are legendary. But let's take a look and see what features are actually on the board and what you get. So let's start off in the top corner here. So we have got a 8-pin EPS connector or supplementary CPU power connector. Nice and easy to get to, and nicely, because the heatsink here is a little bit smaller than some of the other B550 boards, this is going to be nice and easy to get to in those slightly more cramped cases. Next to that, there is a heatsink over part of the VRM, as there is here as well. Decent size heatsink, and also the VRMs on this, pretty legendary. We've got a 4+2 setup on here, not using doublers, so it is a raw 4+2, which is fine for pretty much most processors. They do actually list in the compatibility guide that this will support up to and include in the Ryzen 5950X, should you wish to, although realistically I don't think this is probably the board that most people would pair with that level of processor. But certainly this does have the power in those VRMs to manage with that kind of heat load. Next up along the top here, so there is a CPU connector up here for plugging in your CPU fan connector, 4-pin PWM. As always with MSI, it is supported in the MSI Center And also you can go into the BIOS and choose things like 3-pin or 4-pin style setups, voltage control, PWM, all that kind of stuff. Very easy and very simple to configure, as you can see in some of our videos up here. Moving across from that, we've got our 4 RAM slots. So this supports up to 128 gigabytes of RAM should you feel the need to, and it speeds up to 4133 megahertz. Obviously, depending on the time of watching this actual video, that may have increased to include 4400 megahertz. Moving across at the top, we have a RGB connector. Now this sadly is only a 12 volt RGB connector, so the normal kind of Aurora Sync color fade, so it goes from one color to the next, etc. Or you can choose static colors. If you're looking at having the kind of unicorn puke or the chase effects, very similar to what I've got going on in the background there, sadly this board won't support it, so you will need a separate controller in order to do that. It does support 50/50 LEDs on this connection at the top, and there is also another one at the bottom, so if you want to have RGB in your system, you certainly can do, just not addressable RGB. Moving down further, we've got a pump fan connector. So again, being that this is MSI board, MSI sensor, etc. in the BIOS, you can configure that to be either a pump header, or you can choose it to be a fan header, whatever you want to do, 3-pin, 4-pin, like I said before, and the same goes for system fan header 1, which is just below that. Next up is something which is going to be super useful for you, especially if you're doing upgrades and you're using slightly more modern processors, and you're not sure if it's going to actually boot or whether the BIOS is actually been upgraded in the box as it is. There is the Easy Debug LEDs. These are fantastic. I really do like these. It's a very simple way of knowing if your system is going to work or what the problem is if it doesn't. There's 4 LEDs on there: CPU, RAM, VGA and boot. So depending on what the system actually gets stuck on, that is going to light up. So if you put in an unsupported processor, it's more than likely going to hang on the first one, which is CPU. If you've got memory timing issues, then it'll stop on the second. If your graphics card is missing, then it's going to stop on VGA, etc, etc. You get the idea. Moving down from that, we've got our 24-pin main power connector in the usual place, as you would expect to see. Center of the board, you've got the AM4 socket, usual thing, nothing to speak of there. Again, will support up to the 5950X should you wish to, or because it's a B450 chipset, it will take anything as low as the Ryzen 3 1200. So everything from the bottom of the stack right the way up to the top. Just below the power connector, there is another system fan header there, so that's system fan header number 4. Below that, we've got some SATA ports on here. So the SATA ports are controlled by various means. There's some which are controlled from the chipset, some are controlled from the CPU itself. If you are using SATA ports 5 and 6, then sadly the M.2 slot won't work, and obviously if you have an M.2 drive in here, then SATA ports 5 and 6 aren't going to work, so you can't connect all the drives at the same time. SATA drives these days, again, having 6 ports, 4 drives, I think that's probably going to be enough for most people, but let me know in the comments. Next to the SATA ports, there is the MSI chipset cooler, which is over the top of the B450 chipset there to keep things nice and cool. Going back up slightly, we've got the M.2 slot, as I mentioned earlier. So this is going to be PCI Express Gen 3 x 4. Sadly, obviously, depending on what processor you use, that may or may not be limited by the actual CPU itself, or if you're using an APU, you may find reduced speeds there. But for the optimum performance, PCI Express Gen 3 x 4 with a Ryzen 3000 series processor will be absolutely fine. Obviously, this is limited, so even if you put a Gen 4 compatible processor in, it is going to downgrade to Gen 3 speeds. Sadly, there isn't a heatsink over the M.2. Bit of a thing, but again, most drives these days do actually come with pretty decent coolers, or you can actually pick up a cheap one to add on should you wish to. Links to those will be up there also. While we're in this area, there is also another system fan header over on this side, so lots of fan headers on here, which is always a nice thing to see. So moving back down to the bottom section, so again we had our 4 SATA ports there, 2 there. Next up there is a USB 3.0 header for front panel connections, and moving along next to that there are 2 USB 2.0 headers, each supporting 2 USB ports. Moving on slightly from that, in a slightly unusual position, we've got our front panel connectors. So you've got your normal front panel selection there, hard drive LED, power LED, reset switch, power switch, etc. And just above that, the 4-pin connection is for your BIOS speaker, should you wish to use one. Personally, I would have liked to have seen those further over into this corner. There doesn't seem to be much else going on here, so it would have been handy to have it there for cable management purposes, and for some cases that have slightly shorter I/O reach cables, then yeah, that could be slightly problematic for some people. Moving along from that, there is the dreaded TPM connection. So there is a TPM header there, and just above that there is a BIOS reset switch, which is conveniently just above the BIOS battery, which I guess if you wanted to, you could probably just flip the battery out, or you can use that as a reset, whichever you want to do. Next up, there is a COM port. So if you want to use a COM port, not many people do these days, but certainly it is there should you wish to. There is yet another fan header. So again, 3-pin, 4-pin, PWM, etc., all supported on there. And moving along next to that, there is the second of our RGB connections. Again, this is only 12 volt RGB. So do please bear that in mind if you want to go for a unicorn puke style build. Last up on this bottom section, we have got the front panel connection for HD audio. And above that, then we have our audio chipset, and also we have the Nichicon capacitors there. So moving back to the PCI Express ports, so we've got 3 PCI Express Gen 2 x 1 ports, and also there is a PCI Express Gen 2 x 8 slot. Now again, depending on what you're using, because of the limitations of the B450 chipset, if you plug in something into one of the X1 slots, then this slot is going to be downgraded to X4 or X2, etc., etc. Full details of that are in the user manual. I'll also link to the PDF for that actually in the video description, so if you want to check out in more detail and see what is compatible with your specific processor you're looking at using, then please refer to that manual. So I think that's pretty much it for the board itself. Let's take a look at the rear I/O. So the rear I/O is actually not bad. It's for its time when it came out back in 2020, totally suitable. Now in 2022, I don't know whether there's some things which could have been omitted which would have made things better. Let me know what you think in the comment section. One of the things they have got, which is really good to see and something which I use on a regular basis, is the BIOS flashback button. So there is a little BIOS flashback button in there you can press. In order to do that, you download the BIOS, put it onto a USB stick, stick it into the USB port, press the button, you can flash the BIOS. So if you are planning to use one of those 5000 series processors or something new which isn't supported by the board out of the box, then you can quite simply flash the BIOS. If you want to see how to do that, there will be a follow-up video on this. This actually is going to be part of a 3 or 4 part video. So this is the unboxing. We are going to be doing other things as well, such as the BIOS flash, also how to flash it within M-Flash, and also performance testing as we go on. So moving along, so we've got our 2 USB 2.0 ports, which handy to have. We've got the old-fashioned combo PS2 port, which these days probably you don't need it so much. More of a relic of the past, but certainly it is there and usable should you need to use it for some older keyboards and mice. There's a DVI-D port on there, so that's going to support up to 1920 by 1200 at 60 Hz. Whether or not you're going to be using DVI these days, not too sure. Obviously that is going to be only if you're using a APU. Same goes for the HDMI port, so these 2 ports are purely if you're using an APU. If you're using a discrete GPU or a separate GPU, those ports will not be active at all. Moving along from there, we've got the USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, so those are going to be 5 gigabits per second, 2 of those. And next to that, there is the faster ports, so these are 10 gigabits per second. That's a USB Gen 3.2 Type C and a Type A. And above that, we've got the Realtek Gigabit LAN. Moving along, we've got the jacks for our audio output, so 6 outputs there for surround sound, all that kind of stuff. Let me know in the comments, are you going to be using surround sound? When was the last time you used 6 of those input jacks? Are you going to be using this just with a headset microphone, or are you going for a USB setup these days? Let me know, be interested to hear. So there we go, that is the MSI B450 Tomahawk Max 2. I'm not particularly impressed with the upgrades over the version 1. There doesn't appear to be anything obviously on there which is kind of groundbreaking. It's nice to have the 3000 series BIOS included out of the gate. My thoughts are that MSI really have kind of gone with the branding of this and thought, well, Tomahawk's a very good selling brand name. The Tomahawk Max has done spectacularly well in sales, so why not just upgrade the details and call it version 2? Which seems a little bit disingenuous if I'm completely honest with you, but again, if you're able to buy this for exactly the same price as the Tomahawk or Tomahawk Max, then yeah, there's no harm done, but I think it's a little bit misleading to call it a version 2 when essentially, other than the 4 things I mentioned earlier in the video, there's basically no changes whatsoever. But what I think isn't important, what you do is, so do let me know in the comment section what you think of this one, and are you impressed with it? Do you think it is a little bit disingenuous that they've called this the Max 2 rather than just being the Max 1 and just calling it or a different revision? Seems a little bit weird to me. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.